Hey guys, tonight we return to a world where the night was truly dark. A world without electricity, without clocks. Only the soft crackle of burning wood and the dull red glow of dying embers casting light upon drowsy faces. In a small wooden house somewhere in the medieval countryside, you wake in the middle of the night without knowing why, and that was perfectly normal. The good news: our ancestors were never sleepless. They simply slept in the way the human body was meant to sleep. The bad news is that we, hard to sleep now, are the ones who have lost half the night. So, before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And I would love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Leave your location and local time in the comments below, so we can see how the night drifts across this world together. Now then, turn off the lights, sink beneath your warm blanket, and let us begin tonight's journey. Quietly, gently. In the absolute darkness of a medieval night, people awoke without knowing why. No sound, no nightmare, no disturbance from outside. Only a gentle awakening, quiet, almost sacred, between two heartbeats of the night. Outside, the wind slipped through cracks in the door, brushed against cold stone walls, and the sky, deep, still, and utterly unlit, hung over everything like a heavy cloth thrown across the world. In that moment, there was no notion of clock or time, only the strange bodily knowledge that one had slept enough for half the night, while the soul remained awake, listening to something that seemed to echo from within the silence itself. The medieval mind did not fear this waking. They did not think anything was wrong, nor did they turn restlessly, forcing themselves back to sleep. They simply sat up, looked around the dim room lit by embers, felt the fading warmth of the hearth, and knew this was the time between sleeps, a moment when the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Modern historians call this phenomenon segmented sleep, a pattern once common across Europe for centuries, but to those who lived it, it was not a theory. It was the natural rhythm of life, a perfect harmony between body, darkness, and the turning of the earth. You can imagine it. Inside a small timber cottage in 13th century England, the beams creak under the night wind. Ashes smoulder in the hearth, and the steady breathing of the family rises and falls from the shared bed. Someone stirs, opens their eyes, stokes the fire, takes a sip of water, then sits in silence, eyes fixed on the faint glow across the ceiling. Not loneliness, but a deep, ancient peace. A stillness the modern world has almost forgotten. In that instant, a person was no longer a tool of the day, not summoned, not hurried. They simply were, resting within the night. Historians like Roger Kirch, who first revived this forgotten idea, call it the interval of humanity, that middle portion of the night once reserved for the most private acts of being. Prayer, reflection, whispered talk with a loved one, or the quiet rhythm of one's own heartbeat in a wooden room. When you lived in a world untouched by artificial light, darkness was not the enemy. It was a veil of protection, a rest for the soul, and within that veil, waking at midnight was no disorder. It was a return, the natural breath of humankind within the long cycle of the night. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel it. The pulse of the red fire, the scent of wood smoke, the whistle of wind through the door, and warmth gathering around your body. In that thick darkness, the senses sharpen. You hear the shifting of cattle in the barn, the drip of water from the thatch, even the whisper of your own thoughts. This is what the modern world has lost. The pause between two sleeps, when the body rests and the mind is free to wander. Perhaps on such a night, a farmer might kneel in prayer, a mother might mend clothes by the hearth, or a Benedictine monk might rise to the distant bell of matins. Yet all of them, across every rank and life, shared the same ancient rhythm. Sleep divided, but the night made whole. For in that waking interval, people did not merely rest, they existed and remembered that they were alive. And perhaps it was in those silent hours that humanity dreamed its deepest dreams, not while asleep, but in that fragile space between two slumbers, when the world lay still and the soul was still whispering to the dark. Before the 18th century, the world still moved under the absolute rule of the sun and the moon. When twilight fell, nothing could hold back the dark except for flame, oil lamp, or a few fading candles of weak wax. That light was never bright, only enough to draw ghostly shapes of people on the walls. The rest of the world drowned in a darkness with weight, thick, still, and so deep that you could hear the beat of your own heart when you stood within it. Medieval people did not command the night. They followed it, letting life itself yield to the natural rhythm of light, work when it shone, rest when it faded. You live in a small village in Plantagenet, England, the thatched roof blackened with smoke, the wooden walls damp, the earthen floor scattered with dry straw. Smoke from the evening supper, stew, bread, a little weak ale, still lingers in the air. Out in the byre the cattle lie still, the horse snorts, its breath rising as white mist. No one speaks once the fire begins to die. There is only steady breathing, the creak of a bed, and then silence. In that silence, the household drifts into its first sleep, a sleep that comes early, deep, and complete, a natural reflex in a world that has never known electricity. In 14th century Florence, you walk the cold, cobbled streets. The taverns are shut, the shops unlit, the last shutters drawn. Church bells mark the watch of the night, echoing distantly like a slow and steady breath. No one moves about, no one needs light. Moonlight spills over the piazza, gleams on stone statues, while the wind carries the damp scent of moss from the Arno. Night is not a waiting, it is a part of life. The city, like the countryside, knows how to rest, how to stop. No one orders the hour of sleep. No one goes to bed early or stays up late. When the light fades, work ends, and the body obeys. The craftsman leaves his chair unfinished. The weaver folds her loom. The farmer lays down his hoe. All of society contracts into the rhythm of darkness. Homes are small. There is nothing to do once daylight has gone. Sleep is not a choice. It is part of the natural order, quiet, repetitive, unquestioned. The American historian Roger E. Kirch sifted through hundreds of records, court testimonies, medical texts, poetry, even the Bible, to prove that first sleep and second sleep were once common terms across Europe. Old writings note, "After first sleep I rose to pray," or "In the middle of the night husband and wife talked, then slept again." These lines were not strange, merely fragments of a forgotten rhythm, when people divided the night in two without realizing they were doing anything unusual. You hear that night, the fall of ash in the hearth, the wind threading through thatch, the crack of timber in the cold. In a world without lamps, sound is the measure of life. Each noise has a shape, the sigh of a house, the faint whine of a latch, the stir of a rooster outside. People lived within that space, blended with it, neither resisting nor rushing. Artificial light had not yet been born, so the moon was the only clock. When it was full, the night grew so bright you could touch your own shadow on the ground. People went out, to the fields to fetch water to feed the animals. When the moon waned, they stayed inside, shut the door, and let the night keep them. Life's rhythm was slow, circular, steady. but profound. Nothing in the modern age resembles it. To the medieval mind, darkness was no enemy. It was the space where body and mind rested together. The absence of light did not frighten. It taught the art of stillness. And in that darkness, people found a kind of balance that our illuminated world has long lost. And then, as the light from the fire dwindles, you reach for the last warmth of the embers. Someone stirs, opens their eyes. No panic, no confusion, only awareness. It is time. They sit up, stir the fire and quietly add wood. Outside, the wind passes through the meadows carrying the chill. The night is far from over, but the first sleep has ended. That moment, between two rests, is not a boundary, but the heart of the night, a silent ritual binding humanity to the dark. And from here, the story drifts onward to its next chapter, the first sleep, when the sun sets and the body rests. In the thick darkness of a world untouched by electricity, time slows, like a stream of cold water winding through silence. After a long day, everything in the village has stopped. The hearth gone out, the barn quiet, the fire fading to ash. Darkness is no longer a boundary, but the shared breath between people and the land. And from that stillness, another rhythm rises, the rhythm of the first sleep. You live in a small timber house in the north of England, mid-14th century. Night has fully fallen. Supper has just ended, simple as every other evening. Dry bread, a bit of cheese, perhaps some salted meat if the winter has not been too cruel. No one speaks much. When the meal is done, the father scatters warm ash over the embers to keep them alive till dawn. The mother folds her woven cloth, and the children lean against one another, eyes already closing. No lamp stretches the evening longer, no reason remains to stay awake. When the fire dies, the night begins. The first sleep usually comes early, around 8 in the evening when the air has cooled. In the wooden room, moonlight seeps through the thatch, tracing pale lines across silent faces. The body sinks. Breathing slows, blood eases in its flow. It is the deepest phase of the night. When strength is restored, joints rest, and the mind drifts to a place without images. If anyone wakes, they do not name their dreams, for to them sleep and waking are parts of one continuous stream, two halves of the same night. In the rural corners of Europe, the bed is the heart of nocturnal life. 4 or 5 bodies share it for warmth. You hear mingled breaths, the rustle of linen, the quiet pop of wood in the hearth. On the thatched roof, rain patters softly. Beyond the shuttered window, wind moans across the fields. The world contracts to a few square feet of warmth, and within that space the first sleep arrives as an ancient reflex handed down through millennia. No one thinks it strange, because everyone sleeps the same way. This habit is not confined to peasants. Even in French castles, behind thick stone walls where torchlight flickers on velvet drapery, the rhythm of the night is the same. Nobles, clerics, servants alike drift into first sleep after supper and a brief prayer. Pliny the Elder, writing in the late Roman Empire, described the same custom as something self-evident. Eat early, sleep early, wake at midnight, then rest again. By the Middle Ages, this pattern spread across Europe, from Anglo-Saxon cottages to Benedictine monasteries. The structure of the night depended not on class, but on the turning of the sun. Across these layers of society you see one constant. When darkness falls, people set aside all their roles. Farmer, noble, monk, all lie beneath the same roof of night. Darkness equalizes them, drawing them back into a single state. Bodies folded, minds dissolved, breath steady. This is when the medieval world truly rests, not only in flesh, but in spirit. Modern science calls this stage slow-wave sleep, when the brain quiets, energy rebuilds, and the body restores itself. Medieval people had no name for it, yet they lived wholly within its rhythm, sleeping early, waking at midnight, then sleeping again. This pattern perfectly matched a body governed by natural light. When darkness filled the sky, when no sound intruded, sleep was not a duty but an instinct, pure and ancient. In that wooden room, you hear your own heartbeat mingling with the breath of the one beside you. All sounds slow, all movement melts into the backdrop of night. A cold gust seeps through the door, making the fire flare and die. It is the last sound before consciousness drops fully into deep sleep. No clocks, no plans for morning, only night, and night doing its quiet work. That moment, the first sleep, holds nothing mystical. It is simply the body's surrender to nature, the acceptance of stillness. Yet within that surrender lies an old order, humanity giving itself to the night, trusting it to carry them safely into another day. And after 3 or 4 hours, when ash cools and fire fades, the body will know on its own. It is time to open the eyes, to enter the space between two sleeps, where the soul meets the darkness. The first sleep passes like a slow tide. In the cold wooden house, the breathing of people and animals rises and falls together. The coals in the hearth are dimming, the last light brushes faintly against the wooden wall, where a sleeping shape has curled into stillness. The body has fully rested. Blood flows gently. The mind drifts free of thought. Outside, the wind whistles through the thatch, tugging at a loose door like the distant pulse of the night itself. And then, within that vast silence, something begins to stir, the quiet awakening of humankind. Not by command, not by sound, but by the simple rhythm written into every living thing. The first sleep is done. Around midnight, you hear the faint stir of ashes in the hearth as someone shifts, then sits up. The first flicker of ember light flares as a log is nudged back into place. The room warms slowly, and at the same time come the soft sounds of fabric moving, a child's sigh, a mingled rhythm of breathing. There is no urgency. No one wakes another. Everything happens as part of the night's own order, a moment the ancient world had known for thousands of years. You live in the Middle Ages and you understand that when the fire's rekindled, it marks the hour between two sleeps. The flame is not just for warmth, but for the comfort of knowing you still exist within the dark. In that moment, people do not return to work, nor do they fall back into slumber. They enter a short interval, half waking, half dream, where time itself seems to pause. In the Benedictine monasteries of the 11th century, at this very hour, the bells for matins begin to ring. You hear the echo of metal along the cold stone corridors, reaching into narrow sleeping cells. The monks rise, wrap themselves in wool cloaks, and walk across the damp courtyard. Each step sounds soft and hollow. Each breath forms a mist in the freezing air. Inside the chapel, dozens of candles are lit, and the chant begins, measured and steady as a heartbeat. This is the sacred hour, the hour of night and of God, when the soul believes it can hear heaven more clearly than at any other time. In the cottages of ordinary folk, the scene is humbler, yet it moves to the same rhythm. A mother bends to nurse her child by the faint glow of the fire. The husband sits near the hearth, carving a tool handle or mending his worn boots. Sometimes they only sit staring at the flame, saying nothing. The ashes crackle, smoke curls beneath the low rafters, and the red light paints their half-awake faces. That night no dreams are needed, for waking in the middle of the night is itself another kind of dream, quieter, truer, slower. To wake at midnight was not thought strange. It was a natural part of life. From peasant to noble, all shared that silence. It was a time for reflection, for prayer, for murmured talk, or simply for resting beside the darkness. To the medieval mind, the night was not divided by clocks. It was a living body, breathing with its own rhythm. And within that breath, the waking between sleeps was the hour when the night opened its eyes, slow, kind, and full of meaning. You pass through that moment as a witness. The house is still, but not entirely asleep. Every sound has its place. The snap of wood, the rustle of cloth, the soft pop of a coal. The world is no longer day, but not yet dawn. This is the hour of in-between, where man neither commands nor surrenders, but simply exists. In that suspended space, they live slowly, reflectively, sensing the quiet fact of their own being. When the fire is fully kindled again, the night resumes its course. The body cools, the eyelids grow heavy, breathing deepens once more. People lie back down, draw the blanket close, and the second sleep begins. No sharp transition, no boundary, only the dimming of firelight and the spreading warmth across the room. To the modern mind, waking in the night might seem a symptom of insomnia, but to the medieval one, it was a silent ritual of existence. The sacred portion of the night when the body rested but the soul remained awake. When the fire burns steadily in the hearth, the darkness inside the wooden house is no longer cold. The father leans against the wall, eyes fixed on the glowing heart of the embers, the heartbeat of the night itself. The mother sews by the trembling candlelight. The needle touches the cloth with a sound as soft as a whisper. The child, fed and content, has fallen asleep again, cheeks flushed in the glow. Outside, snow drifts lightly. The wind circles the thatched roof like a distant voice singing. Everything is still, but it is not an empty stillness. It is a pause in time, where waking and dreaming meet with quiet tenderness. In that moment, the medieval soul did not think of itself as awake. It was merely stepping into another hour of life, an hour for the spirit, slower, deeper, and somehow nearer to the divine. For them, this wakefulness didn't break the night's rest. It bound humankind back into the order of the cosmos, where light and darkness take turns, and the human heartbeat keeps time with the turning of the world. You hear the bells from afar, a round, low sound rolling through the valley. In a Benedictine monastery a few miles from the village, the monks have just been roused. They leave their beds, draw their woolen cloaks tight, and walk barefoot along the cold stone corridors. The bell is God's summons. It is time for matins, the midnight prayer. It is one of the 8 parts of the divine office, the cycle of devotion that divides the day and night into sacred hours. For the medieval church, it is not dawn, but midnight itself that marks the holiest moment of all. You walk beside them through the cloister courtyard. The wind moves through the stone columns, tilting the candle flames. Inside the chapel, hundreds of small lights are lit, reflecting against the damp walls, on thin faces and clasped hands. The Latin chant begins, steady and mournful, like the pulse of the old world. Domine, labia mea aperis. O Lord, open thou my lips. They believe this is the hour when God listens, not in the day when the mind is restless, but in darkness, when the soul is purified by silence. To pray now is to perform a rite between man and night, to ward off fear and to seek comfort. In 15th century manuscripts from Avignon, believers were urged to pray when the darkness fills the soul. For at that hour, faith was no longer theory but survival. a warmth of spirit against the cold. You stand in that chapel and listen as the chant mingles with the wind. The air smells of beeswax and incense, of damp wool and human breath. Light shimmers on the vaulted ceiling where the smoke drifts upward. Outside, snow blankets the courtyard. Inside, voices flow like an underground stream. Night is no longer night, but a bridge between two realms, one of flesh, one of spirit. In the humble cottages beyond, though there are no bells or hymns, faith takes its own quieter shape. A man crosses himself and whispers a short prayer before rekindling the fire. A woman mends a sleeve, murmuring the Pater Noster under her breath. A farmer gazes through the small window, where the moon is half hidden by clouds, and sighs. All are variations of the same act, keeping the soul awake while the world sleeps. To the medieval mind, this hour is sacred, a fleeting moment when the veil between earth and heaven thins. Between two sleeps, between two halves of night, people find the hollow space in which to speak to God, or at least to hear themselves. No church is required, no grand ritual, only flame, breath, and stillness. As the prayers fade into darkness, the night begins to close once more. The bells of matins fall silent. The monks return to their cells. The villagers lie back down. The ashes cool. The warmth disperses. The eyes grow heavy. The holy hour ends, but its echo, that sense of being heard, of resting within quiet, lingers until the first crow of dawn. As the last notes fade, the monks close the wooden doors softly behind them. The final candle gutters out, leaving a thin curl of smoke twisting through the dark. Outside, snow continues to fall, covering the cloister in a fine white layer. The night passes through its centre, the deepest, stillest point, where light and shadow merge into a single, pure silence. Not far away in the cottages of the countryside, the same peace returns. The hearth burns low, the ash turns grey. A mother lays another log, then lies back, pulling the blanket close. Her husband exhales and closes his eyes. The sacred hour yields to the perfect stillness of night. In this moment the world remains in true darkness, untouched by any electric glow, wholly at the mercy of nature. And within that silence something happens inside the body, though they do not know it. Subtle, precise changes, as steady as the turning of the seasons. This is the rhythm ruled not by will, but by light and darkness, powers older than any faith. You live within that night, feeling time drift at its slowest. No clocks, no wheels, no sound of motion. Darkness covers everything like a thick cloth. In such a world, the human body follows its oldest instinct, to sleep by the rhythm of light. When the sun sets, melatonin, the hormone that governs sleep, begins to rise. The eyelids grow heavy, breathing deepens, the heartbeat slows. After a few hours, as the night reaches its depth, melatonin dips for a while. The body wakes and then climbs again before dawn. This cycle divides the night into two natural halves, exactly as medieval people once lived it, without ever needing to explain it. Centuries later, researchers tried to recreate those conditions in their laboratories. They extinguished every light, letting only fire and the natural rhythm of day and night remain. The results mirrored the old records. Humans did not sleep in one long stretch, but in two distinct phases. A deep first sleep, a quiet waking, and a second rest. When artificial light disappears, the body seems to remember, to return to the ancient pattern our ancestors once knew. You listen to your own body within that darkness, the slow heartbeat, the calm breath, the warmth gathering under wool. Outside, the wind still howls, but within, you rest in the middle of the night, not dreaming, not waking, simply still. And now, melatonin begins to rise again, like a tide returning, drawing the body gently into its second phase of rest. Sleep comes once more, effortless, unforced. Everything moves as it always has, as it did for millennia before humanity ever invented the word insomnia. In that world, the body and nature were one. There was no electric light to deceive the senses, no labour to keep the mind taut until midnight. When the light faded, the hormones spoke, and humankind obeyed. They did not try to stay awake, nor did they strive to sleep. They simply let the night perform its work. That obedience gave the medieval rhythm a steadiness we can scarcely imagine. Darkness did not weary them. It sustained them through the measured pulse of biology. Today, in our white-lit rooms, we no longer know what true darkness is. Electric light severs the body's ancient signals, confusing day with night. We sleep less, sleep lighter, and call the midnight waking a disorder. But to the medieval soul, it was ordinary, even necessary. They slept as the body wished, not as the schedule demanded. Looking back, we see that the 8-hour sleep of the modern age is not a natural truth, but a recent invention, born of lamps, of clocks, of factories. Deep within, the body still remembers the darkness. 2 pulses, 2 breaths, 2 descents into rest and return. And there, in that unlit medieval night, when the fire burned low and melatonin rose again, people sank once more into the second sleep. Quiet, slow, unbroken, lasting until the first rooster's cry blurred through the mist of dawn. When melatonin had guided them back into stillness, the night entered its deepest phase, that moment when the world seemed to stop entirely. The fire's glow was now only a cluster of embers, dull red, flickering like the faint heartbeat of time. No prayers remained, no labour, only breath, heartbeat and darkness. In a 13th century European village with wooden doors bolted and shutters closed, life folded into silence. No hammers, no voices, no wheels upon stone. Only the wind sweeping across empty fields, the soft breath of cattle in the barn, and the murmur of a distant stream. These were not noises. They were the pulse of the world itself, the background rhythm into which humanity dissolved. When everything else was still, silence became the principal sound. The village night was not emptiness. It was full, layered with meaning, a space where the mind was no longer pulled taut by duty or toil. In the dim light of a candle, people sat close together, saying nothing, listening to the crackle of the wood. Someone read a passage from scripture. Another mended a garment or wrote a letter to a distant relative. Each gesture, the movement of hands, the exhale of breath, the whisper of needle through cloth, followed the same tempo. Slow, steady, deliberate. Yet the silence of night was never isolation. It was a network of natural sound where every tone had its place. Medieval people lived with sound. They could tell summer wind from winter wind, the gnaw of a mouse from the crack of freezing timber. Every sound had meaning, a context. When the noises of the day retreated, these smaller ones became signs of life. The shifting of cattle meant the herd was safe. The pop of the hearth meant the fire lived on. The drip of a water clock whispered that time still moved. You sit within that darkness. Your ears sharpen more than ever before. Everything becomes distinct. The creak of a floorboard, the sigh from the next bed. Each sound a whisper of the night itself. In such an atmosphere, silence is not the absence of sound, but a symphony of the minute and the living. A harmony audible only to those who remain still enough to hear it. In the greater cities, in Florence under the Medici, night took on a different hue. In a stone chamber with narrow windows, candlelight spills across open manuscripts. There, a scholar remains awake, his quill moving slowly over parchment. No noise, only the soft scratch of ink, the occasional hiss of wax, the rhythm of breathing. They call this hour l'ora del pensiero profondo, the hour of deepest thought. Between darkness and stillness, the mind flows freely. The ideas too faint for daylight find their way to the page. And in that quiet, whether in a peasant's hut or a Florentine study, the night fulfills its oldest purpose, to restore, to reveal, to let the world think in silence. Silence became the condition of thought. Without it, the mind could not reach its deepest chambers. People of that age believed that only in darkness, when the outer world had completely sunk away, could the soul hear itself, just as a pond can only mirror the moon when its surface is still. Philosophers, theologians, monks, all knew this truth. They did not fear the night, nor the silence. They regarded it as the atmosphere in which the mind could open. Ordinary people shared this feeling too, though they did not speak of it in philosophy. In a small house, silence was the sign of peace. Loud noise meant danger, thieves, fire, war. But when the night passed in stillness, it meant the village was safe, the harvest sound. Silence, therefore, was a kind of faith. It carried the meaning of order, of harmony, of the world continuing as it should. You hear that world breathing evenly, the wind through the door cracks, the fire dying, the far-off toll of the church bell marking the third watch. No one speaks, yet everything converses in its own language. Even when humans sleep, the night remains alive, moving like a living body, slow, deep, and soundless. The medieval mind understood that night was not merely the absence of light. It was its own realm, with character, voice, and rhythm. If the day belonged to labour, the night belonged to thought. And in the waking interval between two sleeps, people stepped across the thin border between waking and dream, into a world not entirely real, yet not entirely unreal. When the last candle burned low, they laid down their quills and closed their books. The room drifted into full darkness. No one said good night. No one needed to. The world returned to the perfect silence of night, a silence not dead, but alive, filled with the soft sound of stillness itself. In that moment, the medieval night did not merely cover humanity, it listened to them. And as breath blended with the dark, people slipped back into the second sleep peaceful, as though there had never been any boundary between dream and waking. When the world grew so quiet that only the faint fall of ash remained, the body began to grow heavy, and the darkness, as if it understood, softened once more. The last candle died, leaving behind the faint scent of burnt wax. After that brief waking, the night opened its second gate of sleep, deeper, longer, gentler. In the villages of 13th century Europe, everything returned to order. The farmer pulled the thick wool blanket over his shoulders, his body loosening, heartbeat slowing. In the barn, the animals too settled down. Only the warm breath of life remained. Outside, wind brushed the thatched roof, rattled the wooden frame, then disappeared into the fields. No one counted hours, yet everyone knew. The night was not over, and there was still time to rest. The second sleep never hurried. It came lightly, like mist, without effort. After the quiet wakefulness, people had let go of all thought, leaving the body hollow and ready for perfect rest. This was not the sleep of exhaustion, but of restoration, the natural ending of the night. In the faint glow from the hearth, the sleeping faces were marked with a peace rarely seen by day. You lie in that wooden room, hearing the wind shift outside the wall. After a while, drowsiness arrives, not swiftly, but slowly, like a drifting tide. Everything sinks, the breath, the heartbeat, the mind itself. The night gathers you again into its familiar arms. This is the longest, deepest sleep, when the mind no longer wanders, and dreams, if they come, drift as gently as fog across the meadow. The second sleep often lasted until the rooster crowed, or the church bells rang for the third watch. In the far north, where winters stretch long and nights endless, it could last until 8 in the morning, when the first light finally slipped through the shutters. In the south, in Italy, in Spain, where dawn came earlier and life followed the rhythm of morning mass, people rose sooner, yet kept the same twofold rhythm. The difference did not break the pattern. It only showed how each land bent itself to the sky. The English diarist and historian Samuel Pepys, writing in the 17th century, still mentioned the custom as a simple fact of life. He wrote, "After my first sleep, I woke, walked a little in my chamber, and slept again until morning. Even the nobility, with their feather beds, their leisure, and their solitude, were no different in the eyes of nature. They lived within the same darkness under the same turning sun, their bodies following the same ancient rhythm, obedient still to the quiet call of the night. What is remarkable is that the second sleep was never seen as idleness. It carried no guilt, no shadow of laziness. In an agrarian world where the day began with the sun, sleeping longer did not delay anything, for nothing began before the light. When the sun had not yet risen, there was no reason to rise either, and so the second sleep became the natural extension of the night, a small gift of time. Modern science, looking back, calls this phase the natural REM cycle, the period when the mind awakens inwardly, weaving dreams, repairing itself. But the medieval world needed no such vocabulary. They simply knew that when they woke in the night and slept again, morning found their bodies lighter, their minds clearer, and the new day arrived with a calm sense of continuation. You feel the first light touch your eyelids, not harsh, but pale and thin, like mist. A distant rooster cries. The fire has cooled completely, and the air carries the damp breath of dawn. Your body stirs of its own accord, seeking the last traces of warmth under the blanket before your eyes open. The second sleep ends not with an alarm, but with the slow return of light. In the Benedictine monasteries the matins bell has long since rung. The monks cross the cold courtyard, chanting under stone vaults, their voices merging with the echo of distance. In the village beyond, the farmer rekindles his fire, adds wood, prepares the morning porridge. Two worlds, sacred and ordinary, awaken beneath the same pale sky. The night ends, but no one hurries. Everything moves with the rhythm of a long sigh. Within that structure lies a quiet philosophy. The night was never meant for unbroken sleep, but for slowing down. The waking interval was for reflection, the second sleep for completion. This rhythm, natural, balanced, allowed each dawn to arrive not as a jolt, but as the earth's slow turning in its rest. Today we measure sleep by clocks, by data, by devices. But the medieval sleeper measured by feeling. When they had slept enough, they knew. When they woke at the right hour, they needed no reason. Their nights were longer, but truer, gentler, more complete, and in that silence, as the second sleep drew to its end, humanity and the world breathed together in one rhythm, soft, even, unhurried. Then, as the first light spilled through the shutters, the night withdrew, carrying with it the warmth of dreams not yet dissolved. The second sleep faded into dawn like a drifting mist, and the world, after 2 full cycles of rest, began again, slow, quiet, sacred in its ordinariness. When light finally filled the wooden room and the medieval world began to stir, the human body shifted too. The second sleep had ended. No one sprang up. You remained still a while longer, letting breath and pulse return to balance after the long night. In that border between waking and dream, you felt what ancient medicine once described: the silent motion of the body, like water circulating in a deep well. Medieval people had no language of hormones or nervous systems, yet their understanding of the body was startlingly precise. From classical Greece came the theory of the 4 humours: sanguis, blood, phlegma, phlegm, choler, yellow bile, and melancholia, black bile. Health, they believed, was the balance among these fluids, disease the disturbance of their harmony. Sleep, therefore, was not merely rest, but part of the body's natural act of rebalancing itself. After the simple supper, bread, stew, and a little weak ale, digestion began. Physicians taught that the first sleep carried the food from the stomach to the liver, where the blood was cleansed and nourishment distributed. To stay awake too long after supper interrupted this process. To sleep too deeply created trapped heat, bringing fevered dreams or aching heads. Thus, a short waking between sleeps was considered not only spiritual but physiological, a way for the body to release the inner warmth before beginning its second cycle of rest. The French physician Laurent Joubert, writing in the 16th century, advised in his Traité du riz, "Let the body rest first for digestion, then wake a while to temper the heat before returning to bed." This simple counsel carried within it the biological philosophy of an entire age, an age when the body was not seen as a machine to be controlled, but as a living circuit in harmony with the natural world. You sit in the quiet room, hearing the soft murmur of your stomach, feeling the warmth rise gently from within. In those days, that warmth was a good sign, proof that the body was working, turning food into energy and new blood. When the body grew cold or appetite faded, it was seen as the influence of black bile, the humour linked with melancholy and weakness. Sleep, therefore, was not merely a biological need, but a measure of vitality itself. A healthy person was one who slept in rhythm, ate with moderation, and woke at the proper hour between the 2 halves of night. The medieval medical texts, especially the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, the famous health guide from the school of Salerno, declare that sleep is the repose of the body, but also the purification of the blood. People were advised to sleep with their heads toward the north, to avoid red meat before bed, and never to let their rest be broken by sudden loud noises, for these disrupted the balance of the humours. Yet the waking between the 2 sleeps was not considered a disturbance. It was part of the body's natural order. In that language of medicine, blood and bile were not only physical substances, but symbols of temperament and mood. Those rich in blood were cheerful, lively. Those burdened with black bile were thoughtful, prone to sorrow. By dividing sleep into 2 halves, the body found a way to rebalance these fluids. The first sleep to calm, the second to renew. The pattern, repeated each night, was a kind of medicine unto itself, a treatment requiring no physician. You listen to the wind outside and realize both body and world move by the same law. Night does not descend all at once. It flows in cycles. The light fades, heat rises, ashes cool, fire dies. So too the body. Warmth flares with digestion, subsides, then is rekindled by the second sleep. This harmony, though unmeasured by any instrument, was understood by instinct. The medieval person, without microscope or pulse gauge, still sensed the rhythm of their own inner seasons. For them, sleeplessness was not a disease but a sign The body was too full or too cold. Rather than draughts or powders, they sought balance through living, eating less, bathing in warm water, praying before bed, or simply waiting for the inner heat to settle before lying down again. Seen from a modern eye, their cures were nothing less than early sleep hygiene, the art of calming the mind and tuning the nerves. It is strange, almost humbling, that within their simplicity lay a truth science has only recently rediscovered, that the human body moves in cycles and rest is never continuous. Biphasic sleep was not a flaw, it was the most ancient rhythm of all, a biological inheritance our ancestors lived by for millennia. When dawn came, the peasants rose, cloaked themselves and kindled the morning fire. They knew nothing of hormones or melatonin, but they knew they were well. They knew they had slept enough. And the day began in lightness. For them, night was not merely the absence of labour, but a slow process of healing. For the body, for the humours, and for the soul. Through a thin veil of hearth smoke, the first light falls upon their faces, warm, untroubled. The night has not passed in vain. It has done its work. And in the rhythm of two sleeps, slumber, waking, and slumber again, medieval man had achieved a kind of balance the modern world still searches for. As the darkness recedes, and the heat of the hearth mingles with the faint scent of morning smoke, you open your eyes to a world still washed in stillness. The second sleep has just dissolved. The body's restored, the humours settled, yet the mind lingers between dream and waking, where the images of the night have not yet vanished. You do not treat dreams as the games of the unconscious, but as messages. In a culture where all things were bound to God, sleeping and waking alike were never purely of the body, they were the movements of the soul. From the monasteries of Italy to the villages of the Rhineland, the two sleeps were more than a custom. They were a reflection of cosmic order, the first belonging to the flesh, the second to the spirit. Monks and theologians saw in this rhythm a miniature of salvation itself. First, the body must rest, then the soul must rise in midnight prayer before it is granted to sleep again in the grace of peace. Thomas Aquinas in his commentaries once wrote, "The first sleep is of the flesh, the second of the spirit." It was not mere allegory, but a living structure of faith. To him, the body must first be quiet so that the soul might act. When the flesh lies still, the soul can hear the voice of God. The second sleep, therefore, was not a continuation of rest. It was the deepest part of devotion. You lie in the still wooden room, warmth lingering on your skin, and realize that sleep itself was never separate from religion. Every act held sacred meaning. To eat was to preserve strength for the service of God. To sleep was to restore the soul after labour. Even dreams carry theology within them. People believe dreams came from three sources, and the body, the devil, or God. Dreams before midnight, when the body still burned with inner heat, were thought to spring from the flesh, confused, unreliable. But those near dawn, when breathing softened and the soul drifted free, were messages or visions. In Latin manuscripts of the 15th century, one finds long glosses on morning dreams. A monk wrote, "Those who wake between the two sleeps pray and lie down again, often see what God would show them, for their souls hover between waking and dream, nearest to heaven." They called that hour Hora Sancta Somniorum, the sacred hour of dreams. It did not belong wholly to the earthly world, nor yet to the next. It was a border, thin as thread, where spirits could pass without waking man. Such belief was not confined to the church. In southern Germany, folktales said that during the hour between two sleeps, the god Wotan or the goddess Holder passed over the rooftops, granting visions or warnings to the gentle-hearted. People whispered softly, lest they disturb the spirits walking between worlds. In Brittany, young wives prayed during that brief waking, hoping to dream of their husbands at war. Dreams, to them, were not illusions. They were bridges, stretched between the living and the divine. In the monastery, where sleep itself was part of spiritual discipline, the night was divided into fixed hours of prayer. Matins, falling exactly during that interval between two sleeps, was called the hour when God listens. When the bell rang, the monks rose, cloaked themselves, walked the cold corridors, and chanted by candlelight. They believed that in this half-waking state, when the body was frail but the soul lucid, humanity came closest to God. You hear the bell afar, muffled by mist. Its tone is not urgent, but tender, a summons more than a command. In the chill of night, when the world is not yet awake, the human mind opens most easily. The words of prayer come not by memory, but as the natural voice of the soul, passing through that thin veil between consciousness and dream. To the modern eye, such things may seem hazy, but to the medieval heart, the night was never mere rest. It was a daily pilgrimage of the spirit, the first sleep for the body, the second for the soul. Thus they maintained balance between the two halves of being. To live without prayer was to forget the spirit. To pray without sleep was to forget the flesh. Together they formed wholeness. When dawn came and light entered the chapel windows, the monks bowed their heads for the final prayer. They had lived through the night not only in body but in faith. And beyond the monastery, villagers too awoke, shaking off dreams, yet carrying within them something unnamed, a faint sense that the night, though gone, still echoed quietly within the mind. In that world, sleep was never a trivial act. It was the bridge between flesh and soul, between humanity and God. And when the border between dream and waking grew thinnest, one could almost hear what daylight drowned out, the breathing of one's own soul. Leaving the light of theology, where sleep was the metaphor of the soul, we return to the small wooden houses of the common folk, where night meant something else entirely, not symbol, but survival. The candlelight of the monastery was reserved for those who could read. In the villages of England, where life was bound to soil, wind and fire, the night was the only time when people could truly belong to one another. In a one-room timber cottage with a low thatched roof and lingering smoke, 6 people shared a single straw mattress. There was no privacy, no walls, only warmth, of bodies, of breath, of heartbeats mingling with the wind outside. It was not comfort, but endurance. In the damp cold of Yorkshire or Kent, to sleep alone was to risk freezing to death. A bed was not a symbol of intimacy. It was a hearth of survival. You lie there, hearing a child turn over, the soft breath of the father, the faint crackle of the fire. Everything feels ordinary and yet sacred. The midnight waking, when someone stirs to feed the fire, becomes the hour of humanity in its simplest form, without ritual, without distance. A mother mends clothes or nurses a child. A father tells ghost stories. Children listen, half afraid, half delighted. Sometimes this was when husband and wife spoke of things the day had not allowed. The harvest, a quarrel, a quiet reconciliation whispered in the dark. In a world where daylight was ruled by labour, the night was the only space for feeling. Historian Barbara Hannawalt calls it the time of humanity, the hour when people were simply themselves, not peasants, not servants, but breathing, fearing, loving beings. Court records from the period reveal this hidden tenderness in passing details. Quarrels resolved at midnight, confessions murmured in shared beds, folk tales retold across generations. In a society with no leisure, the waking between sleeps became the parlour of the night. a room without walls where people shared, remembered, and simply existed together. You hear the rain on the thatch, the slow breathing of those beside you. The space is cramped, yet it breeds closeness. Sleep does not separate people. It binds them through invisible threads of warmth. In darkness, faces disappear, leaving only the rhythm of breath and heart. That equality between old and young, husband and wife, parent and child, seldom existed in daylight. In rural Europe, the bed was the axis of family life, the place of birth, of love, of sickness, and of death. Children were born upon it. The dying were laid back upon it. Last words, prayers, even unwritten contracts were spoken beside it. Night, therefore, was not only rest, but memory, the archive of what was never written, yet never lost. By the dim flame of a tallow candle, old stories were told again and again. Tales of forest spirits, wandering souls, ancestors who met angels in their dreams. These were not mere entertainments. They were the medieval grammar of the unknown, fearful and familiar at once. Through storytelling, people stitched the living to the dead, the past to the present. The story itself was warmth, the fire of the mind that kept the night alive. To modern eyes, their world seems crowded, unhygienic, starved of privacy. But if you listen closely, within that crowding there is a rhythm, the shared breathing of safety. They were not alone. No one woke in the middle of the night without hearing the quiet pulse of life around them. In many parts of England, the custom of bed sharing extended even to strangers. Travellers, beggars, or visiting friends might be offered a place on the same bed if space allowed. It was not mere hospitality, but a duty of community, a way to keep one another alive through the cold. When the light went out, the line between familiar and foreign blurred. Night turned everyone into creatures of the same breath. You can smell the straw, the smoke, the dampness of the room. Not pleasant, yet profoundly real. There medieval people found peace not in comfort, but in one another's presence. Their nights, though dark and poor, were warmer than ours, nights blazing with electric light but empty of touch. And then, when the rooster crowed, they rose, to the fields, the market, the workshop. They thought nothing of biphasic sleep, nothing of humours or theology. They only knew that night had done what day could not, gathered them together, warmed them with human breath, and reminded them they did not live alone. After the sleepers in the wooden house drifted back into their second rest, the world outside still moved. The medieval night, though it seemed still, never fully slept. As human breathing softened, other sounds awoke. The grind of a distant mill, the measured footsteps along cobbled streets, the crackle of fire from a baker's oven newly lit. It was the quiet rhythm of those who worked while the world rested, the hands that laboured in darkness to bring back the morning light. In cities like London, Paris or Cologne, after the second watch, around midnight, the bakers began their work. They rose not for ritual, but for bread. While others returned to sleep, they kneaded dough, tended coals, and listened to the yeast rise in silence. In that dense blackness, the glow of the oven became the city's small, beating heart, steady, human, and warm. You hear the dry wood pop, the scrape of an iron ladle against stone, the faint sweetness of baking grain drifting through the shutters. Night, which seemed to belong to silence, had its own pulse of labour. At the city's edge, millers turned their wheels, watchmen patrolled narrow lanes with oil lamps and staves. They stayed awake not by habit, but by duty, to guard the sleep of others. A London ordinance of 1388 decreed, "No fire shall be lit, nor ale brewed after the second watch." It was both fire precaution and social control, for night besides quiet, carried danger. Firekeepers, gate watchers, and grain haulers formed the hidden machinery of urban life. They were unnamed in chronicles, yet they kept the city alive. Historian Norman Pounds once wrote, "When the churches were silent, the night workers kept the city from dying. It is an image both humble and profound. While the soul turned toward God, the hands still laboured for dawn." You walk down a street, hearing the clack of wooden clogs on stone, a dog barking in the distance. Beneath the roofs, people sleep. On the road, a few oil lamps throw long shadows against the wall. Now and then, water drips from a gutter, monotonous, reassuring. Someone is awake, someone is watching. In the countryside, night was not entirely still either. Farmers often woke between sleeps to check their livestock, rake the embers, or ready tools for dawn. In the long winters of the north, they rose earlier still, to light the fire, to milk before sunrise. It was not hardship, but rhythm, life moving in quiet accord with the dark. In port towns like Bruges or Lübeck, merchant ships docked at daybreak, and stevedores began work after the first sleep. The creak of wheels over wooden bridges, the thud of barrels against the quay, together they made a slow, steady music. That world did not race against time, it breathed with it. Every task, whether kneading dough or keeping watch, unfolded in a kind of gentle acceptance. Night existed not for sleeplessness, but for the duties that must be done. Perhaps that is why the medieval night bore two faces, one of stillness, one of labour. When half the world dreamed, the other half guarded the dawn. The morning loaf, the steaming porridge, the tolling of the church bell at third watch, all were born from hands that worked in darkness. You feel the chill seeping through the cracks, the glow of firelight from a distant street, and realise that human life never truly stops. In every village, every city, there are always those awake, not from unrest, but from responsibility. In that age, wakefulness was not the sin of insomnia, but a duty, a vital thread in the order of the world. Seen another way, it was these night workers who kept the rhythm of biphasic sleep alive. When townsfolk stirred between sleeps, they found fresh bread, the flicker of an oven, or the slow step of a watchman passing by. Night was no longer a boundary between life and rest, but a living interval of activity, what some modern historians now call the economy of darkness. And when dawn arrived, when the baker's ovens still exhaled their warmth, and the guards handed their post to daylight, the world reversed its roles. Those who'd laboured slept. Those who'd slept rose to eat the bread born of the night they had left behind. The medieval night, therefore, was not an emptiness. It was the hidden half of existence, where hands, breath, and flame quietly kept the world turning. When the bakers had finished sweeping their hearths, and the scent of new bread still lingered in the streets, the first light broke. The medieval world, with its two sleeps, its two rhythms, began to close like the slow turning of a long chapter. For centuries darkness ruled the night. Mankind, obedient to nature's pulse, knew when to rest and when to rise. But then a new light began to appear, not from moon or candle, but from human hands. At first it was the brighter shimmer of oil lamps, then the hiss of gas, and finally electricity. Light no longer belonged to the sun. In Paris, gas lamps, the trembling réverbères, lined the boulevards and did something never before seen. They extended the city's life deep into the night. London moved sooner still. The streets near Westminster shone so bright that people called it the sleepless night. It was the beginning of a revolution, the Révolution de la Lumière, the revolution of light. You walk those streets, hearing the tap of boots on stone, the music spilling from a cafe door. Night has ceased to be rest. It has become a second kind of day. People discovered a new intoxication, the joy of being awake, of being seen, of living in their own light. Theatres opened past midnight, cafes filled with talk, and clubs of philosophy and politics bloomed like nocturnal flowers. In the great cities, night became the centre of thought and pleasure, something no medieval soul had known. But beneath the brilliance, the body began to fracture. Artificial light tricked the flesh into believing the sun still ruled. Melatonin, the quiet herald of sleep, fell silent. The waking hour between the two sleeps, once given to prayer, reflection, and whispered talk beside the hearth, slowly vanished. People slept later, shallower, and to meet the morning bell they compressed the night into a single block. Historian Roger E. Kirch traced this change through urban diaries. Those who once wrote, "After my first sleep," now simply said, "I went to bed." The phrase "second sleep" faded from the language, as if erased by the first electric glow. Then came the Industrial Revolution. Factories in Manchester, Birmingham, Lyon and Hamburg thundered through the night. Light did more than brighten darkness. It cheapened time itself. Men and women no longer slept to the rhythm of the body, but to the rhythm of the machine. The morning whistle replaced the rooster and the church bell, summoning not prayer but production. The factory horn did not merely wake the workers, it awakened a new order, the order of industry. You hear the looms clatter, the iron strike, and realise that sleep was no longer nature's gift. It had become something rationed, measured, reduced to hours and wages. To wake at midnight was no longer sacred or natural. It was inefficiency, a flaw to be corrected. People learned to fear darkness, to fear silence, to fear the stillness that had once defined the night. In the first industrial cities, the night grew so bright the stars vanished. Historian Wolfgang Scheivelbusch, in Disenchanted Night, wrote, "When man illuminated the night, he also erased the boundary between labour and rest." It was an epitaph for biphasic sleep, for the ancient rhythm that once tied humankind to the moon and to the ashes of its own hearth. To live in that new age was to feel the night grow noisy and mechanical. Printers worked until dawn to meet the morning papers. Machinists, weavers, shipwrights turned their wheels by shift. Sleep became the blank space between two periods of labour. No one rose at midnight to tend the fire. They were too tired, and had to sleep deep and fast to answer the next whistle. Light, symbol of progress, had created a new kind of darkness, the industrial night, the sleepless night, the night no longer belonging to nature. But within that brightness something was lost, the gentleness of shadow, the quiet of cinders, the slow double rhythm of the human breath. The night no longer had two parts. It had been compacted, efficient, silent, and short. You stand in a Manchester mill watching gaslight flicker across iron shafts, hearing coughs between the pounding of machines. There is no first sleep, no second sleep, only a short night. Amid the roar of this new world, the night, and with it, the natural rest of humankind, had been industrialized. And when the sun rose, no one thought of sleep anymore, only of the next shift, darkness. Once the realm where souls loosened and dreams spoke had become a mere pause between cycles of work. The world had changed, and with it, the night would never again be the same. As steam hissed across Europe and electric light spread through the streets, humanity entered the age of wakefulness. The world became too bright, too fast, too busy to remember. That night had once been divided in two, first sleep and second sleep. Phrases that lingered for centuries in diaries, letters and verse, disappeared from speech without anyone noticing. No one called it a loss. It was simply that no one lived by that rhythm anymore. You live in London, where Edison's light bulbs have replaced every candle. The night here is no longer slow. It has become a time for work, for amusement, for people who sleep little and dream less. When Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams in 1899, dreams ceased to be messages from God or echoes of the soul. They became windows into the unconscious, the province of science, not faith. Science entered sleep, explained it through chemistry, and in doing so stripped it of its mystery. From then on, waking in the middle of the night, once natural, even sacred, was recast as an illness. Psychologists named it insomnia, a disorder to be treated. Where ancestors once rose to pray, to speak softly, or to watch the fire, the modern person wakes at 2 a.m. and panics. I have a sleep problem. What had been the ordinary rhythm of humanity was now labelled a malfunction. In the great cities, sleep became a luxury commodity. The weight of labour, the roar of engines, the glare of neon all made the night harsh. People invented sleeping pills, nightlights, lullabies, and smart devices to optimize rest. Yet the harder they tried, the further they drifted from nature's rhythm. No one woke in the quiet hours to hear their own heartbeat. Every silence was filled with hum and brightness. You step outside at midnight and look through the factory windows. The light still burns, the smoke still rises. There's no hour between sleeps, only an unbroken night, or no sleep at all. Night shift workers labour under white bulbs. The wealthy gather in dance halls. City children learn to fall asleep to noise. The night has lost its soul. And yet, in distant places, in Irish villages, Balkan mountains, the Scottish countryside, the old still remember. In damp stone houses, as the fire fades and the clock ticks, they recall, our parents used to wake to pray. They never called it segmented sleep, only the waking hour. They rise, pour warm milk, gaze through the window, whisper a word of thanks. Not because they cannot sleep, but because wakefulness itself feels peaceful. Ethnographers in rural Balkan towns still record the remnants of this rhythm. An old woman in Montenegro once said, "The night is long, so we divide it. Sleep a half, wake a half, sleep again. That is enough." For them it is not habit, but instinct, as natural as breathing, hunger or love, a rhythm thousands of years old, buried only by light and noise. You hear her words and sense a soft sadness in them. The history of the night has not vanished. It has merely gone unlived. Like embers under ash, that memory remains somewhere in the body, in those who wake at midnight without knowing why. Perhaps they are not sick at all. Perhaps the ancient part of them still remembers how their ancestors lived. The night has become the emblem of urban life, of loneliness, of light that never dies. The brighter we shine, the more we fear the dark. Yet within that fear there lingers a dim pocket of memory, the lost interval between sleeps, when the soul once found its quietest peace. Today, when we look back, it feels as if the night has lost something vital, something we can no longer name. Perhaps it was the capacity to listen to ourselves, or the slowness of time, or that brief, ownerless hour belonging neither to duty nor to labour, an hour in the middle of the night when the human being was most free. And so that history sank into shadow, not forgotten, but replaced. Like a hearth cooling after use, that sacred hour now survives only in fragments of memory among the old. The world still turns, the night still falls, but it no longer breathes in two parts. There is only one sleep, one unbroken dark, and an emptiness no one can name. As the 20th century drew to a close, beneath the blinding lights of the city and the endless hum of a 24-hour civilization, a few scientists began to wonder, Had we lost something when we began to sleep in one stretch? At the US National Institute of Health, researcher Thomas Ware conducted a strange experiment in 1992. He isolated a group of volunteers from the modern world, no electricity, no clocks, no artificial light, and let them live by natural day and night, as medieval people once did. No one expected what followed. After only a few weeks, they began to sleep, like the ancients. Their bodies divided sleep on their own, a first rest of about 4 hours, followed by a waking period of 1 or 2 hours, then a second sleep until dawn. No one suffered, no one panicked. They had simply returned to the body's original rhythm, the rhythm centuries of urban brightness had buried. Ware recorded that during this waking interval, the brain released unusually high levels of prolactin, a hormone that brings calm, serenity, and what he called a state of quiet alertness. You live inside that darkened room surrounded only by candlelight. You wake in the middle of the night, not from stress, not from screens, but because your body knows it is time to rest between rests. There is no clock to tell you, only heartbeat, breath, and a deep safety inside the chest. Ware named this the natural interlude. It is the hour when, no matter how modern we become, we still hear the faint echo of prehistory in our blood. That experiment revealed a simple, profound truth. What we call a disorder is, in fact, an inheritance. We are not broken. We are merely living against our design. In darkness, the body finds its balance again, and the mind opens. Some participants said they thought more slowly, more deeply, and feared less. The waking hour, once erased from culture, returned as a quiet reminder that once we knew how to rest, how to listen, and how to live in rhythm with the night. The modern world rarely allows such hours anymore. When lights never dim, when sound never stops, when work flows across time zones without end, night becomes merely an extension of day, no longer its own realm. People now sleep by medication, by devices, by exhaustion, not by faith in the dark. And so, when Thomas Ware proved that biphasic sleep was natural, he did more than make a biological discovery. He restored a fragment of human memory. You read his report amid a city blazing with light and feel an odd ache. To understand our bodies, we must first turn the power off. The brighter we shine, the further we stray from ourselves. That hour of the night our ancestors once spent in prayer, in whispers, or in silence, has vanished. Not because it was forbidden, but because we no longer have time for it. In a world that never switches off, darkness has become a luxury, and silence an act of quiet rebellion. Yet sometimes, on the rare nights when the power fails, when the hum stops, and the room falls into sudden shadow, something ancient stirs. A feeling as if the body exhales for the first time in years, as if the mind widens, as if the world shrinks to its proper scale. That is the inheritance of those who once lived inside true night, when sleep was not a task, but a rhythm of body and soul. You wake at 2 a.m, surrounded by silence, and realize you are not alone. Centuries ago, others woke at this same hour, rekindled the fire, read a line of scripture, looked out the window, then drifted back to rest. They knew nothing of melatonin or circadian rhythm, yet they understood by instinct that night was not only for sleep, but for being, slower, deeper, more real. In this sense, biphasic sleep never truly disappeared. It waits for permission to return. In the small patches of darkness untouched by electricity, in those brief midnight awakenings we no longer fear, in every breath that slows between dreams. There we meet ourselves again, ancient, weary but still capable of hearing the quiet. And perhaps in our age, to rediscover darkness is to rediscover humanity. For in the old night, people were not lonely, not hurried, not estranged from their own bodies. They found a kind of freedom, a time unclaimed by labour, duty or noise, belonging only to the soul. Looking back over the history of segmented sleep, from the wooden cottages of the Middle Ages, through the age of machines, to the bright bedrooms of the 21st century, one truth endures. Humans have not evolved far from their ancestors. We have only forgotten how to live with darkness, the night that medieval people once feared, yet loved, where fire, silence and spirit coexisted, mirrors what the modern world most longs for, slowness. You live in an age of velocity, where every hour bleeds into the next, where there is no pause between sleeps, between days. Yet your body still remembers, it still knows fatigue, still hungers for stillness, still longs for the dark. The lesson of the old night is not a call to return to candles and straw, but a reminder. Grant yourself a midnight hour, even metaphorically, a moment to stop, to breathe, to do nothing. For rest is not only the absence of work, but the permission to let the mind fall silent. From the Benedictine monks who rose in darkness to pray, to the peasants whispering stories by the fire, all shared one practice. They gave the soul a space untouched by demand. The modern world has forgotten this, but you do not have to. When you turn off the lights, when your phone is still, when only your own breath remains, you are living again in the rhythm of the ancients, between two sleeps, between two lives. Biphasic sleep teaches that nature keeps its own tempo, and we are well only when we listen. We need not flee the modern world to find the medieval night again. We need only relearn the art of rest. Rest for the body, rest for the mind, rest that allows us to simply be. For sometimes, only in that dim silence do we hear the truest voice. The one that once murmured in every cottage, every chapel, every ancestral dream. And so, amid the brightness and bustle of our age, the hour between sleeps is more than a memory. It is an invitation to return to stillness, to breath, to darkness, and to remember that we have never truly left the ancient human within ourselves.